Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar 5 Reasons Why You Need an External Render Engine in Revit. Once again, my name is Anna. I'm architect and I'm part of the Vray for Revit team here at Chaos Group. Today, in our first episode, we will explore the main advantages of Vray for Revit and how it fits into the typical BIM workflow. It is an undoubted fact that visualization is taking more and more important role in the architectural industry as it creates a bridge between the architect and all other participants in the building process. From our side, we have tried to answer this trend by creating V-Ray for Revit, one of our newest products for the AEC industry. Before we start, I would like to say that at any point of this presentation, if you have any questions, please use the GoToWebinar chat panel to send them over. And at the end of the webinar, I will leave some 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A. I always start my presentations with this short overview about what V-Ray is and its position in the architectural world. Over the years, V-Ray turned into an industry standard in the field of architecture and architectural visualization. 92 of top 100 architecture studios in the world use it on a daily basis. The list that you currently see is showing some of them. Some of them have already started using V-Ray for Revit as well, since it is finally available directly within Revit. The design philosophy we followed was to make V-Ray for Revit easy, powerful, and fast. V-Ray for Revit gives you the power to express your ideas and present them in the best possible way so that they are understandable for everyone. It is easy to use and easy to learn, even if you are a newcomer and have no experience using it before. V-Ray for Revit is designed to get you up and running in no time. And on top of that, it's fast. And here I don't refer only to fast render times, but also to fast workflow and settings which can be set up in a fast way. As a result, you can expect something like this. And if this is not a giant reason to start using V-Ray for Revit and you are still skeptic, let's take a closer look at the top 5 reasons this webinar is addressed to. By the way, be informed that all images that you will see during my presentation were rendered in V-Ray for Revit. Starting with reason 1, the combination of power and simplicity, high quality output in a click of a button. It is not a secret that V-Ray is a user-driven software. That's why we have interviewed hundreds of AEC professionals, mainly architects and designers, in order to conform V-Ray for Revit to their needs. All of them agreed that visualization is not their primary focus, and they treat it as essentially one tool among many in a large toolkit, but they need it without a doubt. And they need to render high quality images in an accessible way, a way that is not time consuming in terms of learning and parameter setup, i.e., they want to get the maximum result while putting as less effort as possible. So we had to take this. For those of you who are not familiar, this is how part of the V-Ray for 3ds Max interface looks like. It is super powerful. It is great for visualization experts, for 3D artists, but not easy to start using it straight away. It gets even more complicated when we set the mode from default to expert. And in addition, you will need to gain at least intermediate knowledge of 3ds Max to be able to operate with it. So we took all this and created this. Same core, same power, less settings. A rendering plugin which installs as a seamless part of the Revit environment. This basically means that you don't have to struggle with any other software platforms to export and reload your Revit module thousands of times. Everything you need fits within this toolbar. Since it is part of the Revit ribbon, it fits inside of the Revit workflow, and it contains just a few buttons, only what you need. Most of the max settings you saw on the previous slide were optimized and hidden from the interface, as I said, with the intention to make the interaction easier and smooth. The render quality, however, remains the same like in 3ds Max, as the V-Ray engine is the same for all our host applications. So now let's jump into Revit and look at it. So initially the toolbar buttons will be grayed out when you run V-Ray for Revit for the first time. Because your Vray for Revit license is not engaged automatically when Revit is launched, you have the control whether to keep the toolbar turned on or off. To turn it on and make it active, you simply need to click the Acquire License button, like this. In case you're a freelancer and you have a working station and a laptop, you can install Vray for Revit on both machines and share your license across them depending on which one you want to use it. In case you are part of an architectural studio, probably your studio will have more Revit licenses than V-Ray ones. Again, you can install V-Ray on all machines and turn it on only on those you want to use it. As you can see, the control over the toolbar is useful in many situations. It provides you with a certain amount of flexibility, but when it comes to flexibility, let's go back to the presentation and move to reason number 2 is flexibility. V-Ray for Revit is actually flexible in many aspects in terms of application, in terms of hardware utilization, and in terms of render modes as well. V-Ray is suitable for all stages of the design process. Depending on the situation, you can use it both for conceptual renderings as well as for highly realistic images. In any case, it can help you present your ideas in a way that is understandable for everyone. I'm sure all of us have faced a problem with clients becoming skeptic when they see a drawing and they can barely visualize it. It just doesn't speak much to them. So basically, this problem can be eliminated with V-Ray for Revit. Besides, most of nowadays clients relate our work to visualization, and this is what they expect to receive from us at the end. Surely a rendering will help you convince easily your clients or your colleagues as well, and in certain occasions to convince yourself as well. And respectively, it will allow you to take design decisions way faster. Here is how a stylized concept rendering would look like. It was rendered using the global material overrides feature in V-Ray for Revit. This feature is great for massing studies as it allows you to explore the impact of opaque and transparent materials in the masses configuration, the combinations of opaque and transparent materials, and so on. Uh, it can be used for lighting and spatial studies as well. I will show you how it works in a while and how fast and easy it is to produce a result similar to the one that we currently see. Uh, this type of rendering is also a starting point for creating a more realistic image, as we need to set up the lighting first without being distracted by different materials and patterns. And if we take advantage of all Vray for Revit features, we can end up with an image like this one. You can also render VR panoramas like that one and view them either on a desktop app or using a VR headset. From a client's point of view, VR panoramas are super impressive as they create a strong feeling how the actual building will look like before being built. Yet from an architect's point of view, I find VR quite useful in cases when you need to explore the space in terms of room measurements, when you need to evaluate specific distances, for example, ceiling heights, railing heights, and so on, as well as if you need to evaluate the realistic light in a room, if the window's opening size is sufficient or not, and so on. Now, jumping back to Revit, I will select which one of the Revit 3D views I would like to render. And at this stage, I am ready to run a rendering. I have two options, production and interactive. Basically, the difference is that interactive will update the image in real time while we play with the settings. So I will run the rendering in interactive mode so that we can see what happens when I change some of the settings. I forgot to mention two things. The Revit model that I'm using was kindly provided by our user Dmitry Kuznetsov. The V-Ray for Revit build that I'm using is not the official one. I'm using one of our latest nightly builds. We can consider this webinar as a giant sneak peek of what's coming. I'm using this build because we have done many changes. We are getting ready to release it very soon. And until our next episode, this new version will be available. And of course, since this is a nightly build, be prepared that some instabilities might occur. So this is the render that I have. And in the asset browser, I have this global materials option where just in a click, you can override all opaque materials with one, all transparent material with just one, and all RPC materials, again, just with one single material. And you can select between color or V-Ray material. You can control the transparency. And in our library, there is a section of diagrammatic materials, which are suitable for conceptual rendering. For example, there's a chipboard model material, there's cork material, um, there is maquette wood material. I will select the cork. I'll select glass for the windows and for all transparent parts of the model. And I can simply tweak the color of the RPCs. Okay. V-Ray for Revit is very flexible in terms of hardware utilization as well. It allows you to take advantage of all hardware resources that you have. By having it, you get two render engines in one, a CPU-based and a GPU-based. Thus, depending on your own machine, you are flexible to render utilizing either the CPU or the GPU, or to use them in a combination. The GPU render engine will do all the ray tracing using the GPU. For now, most people still render using their CPUs, but the trend goes more and more towards GPU rendering since GPUs render very fast, and of course, people want to take advantage of that. Seeing the demand, on our side, we have a dedicated GPU development team. They work hard converting the V-Ray core code so that it can run on GPUs, and thus we all can take advantage of the V-Ray features on GPU. And let's not forget to mention that V-Ray GPU is a production-proven renderer and is already used by many companies and studios worldwide. Now, a few words about the so-called hybrid rendering, something we have introduced in version 3.6. This is the this is the version that is currently official and can be downloaded from our website. Hybrid rendering allows for using your CPU as an additional GPU CUDA device. Thus, you can basically take advantage of both your CPU and GPU devices. It is important to understand that the CPU helps the GPU and not the other way around. And here I have an example proving that many times, if you have a nice CPU, this will result in faster render times, which is great. And as you can see on this video, we got a faster result when rendered using hybrid rendering. What else do we have? Another way to utilize your hardware resources is by using V-Ray Swarm. Swarm is the V-Ray distributed rendering system, which allows you to render on multiple machines at once. Thus, you can utilize all machines in your office and use them for rendering. There is also an option not to use your local machine, which basically means that you can set up the render settings, send the rendering over to be rendered on the other machines, and continue working using the full resources of yours. Note that to use Swarm on multiple machines, a render node license is required for each node, but since Swarm is also supported in V-Ray for SketchUp and V-Ray for Rhino, in case you use any of them, you can use them as render nodes. In case you don't fit in any of these hardware utilization suggestions, then you can try V-Ray Cloud. Our new cloud rendering service is still in beta mode. It is currently open and is calling for beta testers. To be among the first to try it, apply for access by either clicking the cloud rendering button in the V-Ray for Revit UI. Let me show it. Oops. The cloud rendering button, or you can visit our website chaosgroup.com/cloud. The render result that V-Ray Cloud outputs will be the same as the result on your local machine, again due to the V-Ray engine that stays behind. Now let's move on. Reason number 3, the cutting edge tools of the V-Ray toolkit. V-Ray for Revit was designed to fit in your workflow and to work hand in hand with Revit. Besides that, it supports many of the existing Revit options. V-Ray for Revit brings some entirely new features to the Revit world, like Proxies and Fur, which can boost your images by adding highly realistic detail to them. Let's go over the basic steps of the rendering process. We start with setting up the lighting and camera exposure, and then we continue with setting up the materials. So Revit Sun and artificial lights are fully supported by V-Ray. Thus, if you have a Revit model with artificial lights in it, you can render it directly. Any changes in the sun position will be considered as well. So if we run an interactive rendering, we can play with the sun position settings and we can see the image updating. I will turn off the global override settings so that we can see the original model. And as I said, some instabilities are expected with this build, and I will need to restart the rendering. And probably I will have to restart Revit as well. Oh no, here it is. All right. Here we have our rendering. It is illuminated using the Revit Sun. And if I go to Sun settings in Revit, and if I change any of the parameters, like for example, let's set this to 100, the rendering updates accordingly. Now there is another option to illuminate the scene, which is one of those features that are new for the Revit world, the dome light. This option illuminates the scene based on a color or an image. Imagine a huge hemisphere above the Revit model, which is mapped either with a color or with an HDR image, and the emitted light is based on the image. Here it is. And you have the options to rotate the image, to change the intensity, to flip the image, and so on. The camera in V-Ray works like a real-world camera, but it is simplified so that you don't need to be a photographer to use it. It provides control over the exposure value and the white balance just with these simple sliders, and you can add effects like bokeh or vignetting, again using these sliders. Besides the standard camera, there is a VR uh, under the camera mode drop down. Um, it will generate images which can be seen in a VR headset like the one we saw at the beginning of this presentation. So let's go back to the presentation. Materials, Vray for Revit installs along with a library of ready-to-use Vray materials. The V-Ray materials are optimized to work best with the V-Ray engine. The materials are organized in 20 categories suitable for the purposes of architectural visualization. They are very simple to use, just drag and drop. Currently, the exact quantity of V-Ray materials in the library is 554. And since all our users enjoy them very much, we are working on extending the library with even more and more materials. Now let's look at the library. By default, it is installed on your C drive under Program Files, Scales Group, Vray for Revit, and in the folder VRMat Editor, there is a Materials folder, and here they're organized by categories. So if we look at the bricks category, for example, there are different materials, or we can look at the concrete, glass, and many more. As I said, over 500. And for those who want to have their own and unique materials, there is a standalone material editor, which also comes along with the V-Ray for Revit installation. The idea behind it was to be a notepad-like tool for creating and editing V-Ray materials. You can see its interface on this slide. The material settings are split into basic and advanced. Playing with the basic settings is very intuitive. There are just a few settings here. There are also several materials presets to start a material from. For example, a glass preset, a plastic preset, and so on. There is also a large variety of procedurally generated textures which provide unlimited variations in material creation. And as I said, the material editor can be found at the same location where the library is. I can start it here. Here it is, new material. And here we have the basic and advanced settings. Whatever changes you make, they will appear in the preview. And here you have presets. If you switch between the different presets, the preview will change as well. Let's look at the glass preset, metal, and so on. Starting in version 3.6, V-Ray for Revit is compatible with VRScans materials as well. These are our ready-to-use photorealistic scanned materials. We use a scanning technology to scan real-world materials. How it works? An existing object is being photographed from hundreds of angles and directions. The scanner captures the texture information, dimensions, and the most important thing, the unique way how the material reacts to light. This will guarantee that the material will behave like it should under all kinds of lighting conditions. And the best part is that they're super easy to use. Just drag and drop. All materials are seamlessly tileable, and our current library contains over 650 scanned materials. They are available for download on our website. Let me show you. You need to be logged in with your credentials first, and then when you go to downloads, oops, under downloads, there is a VRScans section, and here they are. You can filter by material type, color, manufacturer, tags, and so on. We can look at the wood material, for example. And when you select a specific material, you have the opportunity to look at even closer, like this. And the asset browser is one of the main components of the V-Ray for Revit user interface. It helps you manage the V-Ray assets in the rendered project. You can select and override multiple items at once. Linked project materials can be overridden separately from the host project, something that cannot be done in Revit. As you can see, there are 4 tabs, and all materials can be found in the Material Map tab. Basically, this is a list of all Revit project materials. The, the AutoGen tag next to each material indicates that currently we are using the original Revit material. However, it is automatically generated into a V-Ray one, and that's why the tag is AutoGen. If you want, you can switch it to either a V-Ray material, a diffuse texture, or a color. Of course, using a V-Ray material is recommended. As I mentioned it, V-Ray materials are optimized to work the best in a combination with the V-Ray engine. Now, before I jump into Proxies, a few more words with regards to the asset browser. We already saw what the global materials tab is doing. It allows you to override all opaque and transparent materials just in a few clicks. And the next 2 tabs are related to Proxies and Fur. Proxies allow for rendering high resolution entourage models. They use a file format named VRMesh, which imports complex geometry from external meshes at render time only. The geometry is not present in the project and does not use up any resources. Currently, we are unable to load proxies directly into Revit. For example, in Vray for SketchUp and Vray for Rhino, this is possible, and you can just place a proxy inside of the model. Revit doesn't let us do this. Therefore, you need to have RPCs in the scene because they serve as stand-ins for proxies, and at render time, they are overridden with proxies. Along with the V-Ray for Revit installation comes a tool named Poly to VRMesh. It can be used to convert high poly models, like, for example, OBJ format into VRMesh file format. Thus, you can convert basically any object into VRMesh and use it in your renderings. In the scene that I already showed you, oops, in the asset browser, we have RPCs that are overridden with V-Ray proxy. Proxies work also the same way like VR mats, just drag and drop. But we will get familiar with the entire workflow during our next episode. So if I turn off the trees, we will see the RPC trees. All of them, all RPCs of that type are overridden with just one proxy, like this. And we also have VeryFur. It allows for rendering realistic grass as well as any kind of fluffy and shaggy objects like carpets, cushions, blankets, and so on. This makes it a universal tool which can be used to add detail both in exterior as well as in interior images. VeryFur can also be controlled from the asset browser from the VeryFur tab. And here you can also find a list of all Revit materials defined in the project. And the idea is very simple. You need to create a unique material and assign it to the geometry where you want to add fur to, and then look for this material and enable VeryFur for it. In my current project, the fur is enabled for the grass material. Reason 4, Vray for Revit allows for sharing easily what you've done with your colleagues. Please don't mistake it with Revit's work sharing, and don't expect that every time when you click Sync to Central, you will send your Vray settings to the other team members. Vray for Revit does not work like this. Why it doesn't work like this? Because every team member might use different Vray settings, and syncing to Central might override other team members' settings. Therefore, the Vray settings are stored locally and they can be shared easily in case a proper workflow is established. So starting with a centralized library, by default, we already saw that the VeryFur Revit material library is installed on your C drive. You can select any location for it, even on a server, and point at it under asset paths in the Vray UI. The asset paths are located under settings, paths, and sharing. And basically from here, even if you move your assets to another location, you don't need to remap the entire model, simply add the new path to your assets under asset paths. Vray settings can be shared across users and computers. This is quite similar to transfer project standards in Revit. This is how it looks in the UI. The Vray settings are organized in 6 categories. Using the checkboxes, we can export or load either all categories, or we can select only some of them. This allows for creating and sharing settings templates for specific Vray settings. For example, a material map template, proxies template, different environment lighting templates, and so on. Starting with the upcoming version of Vray for Revit that we are about to release very soon. Uh, Swapping of settings will be available through the Share Settings panel. This means that when you run the interactive rendering mode, you can load settings here, import them, and see the image updating accordingly. Thus, you can have a daylight preset, a nightlight preset, and just switch between them and see which one suits best for your rendering. With regards to the cross-platform compatibility, the format of the Vray materials is called VRMAT. The same material format is used in VeryFur SketchUp and VeryFur Rhino, so no matter which one of those you have, or all of them, you can share your Vray materials across the 3 platforms. Furthermore, the VRMAT materials are supported in VeryFur 3ds Max as well. You can export VRMAT materials from 3ds Max. And now this is a giant sneak peek of what is coming in less than 2 weeks. By now, we had interactive support only for lights, materials, and V-Ray settings. This means that if you run an interactive rendering and tweak the lights or materials, the rendering updates in real time. Starting from our upcoming V-Ray for Revit version, which is expected to be 3.7, all Revit geometry updates are going to be supported during interactive rendering. I have prepared a video demonstrating this awesome new feature. I just went through a few of your questions, and yes, render elements are supported in V-Ray for Revit, and they can be found in the settings panel under channels. Besides the standard render elements, here you can use the denoiser, which basically removes the noise from the image after the rendering has been completed, and also the Z-depth channel that can be used to create depth of field effect. Yes, 3ds Max materials, well, you can create materials in 3ds Max, and then you can export them in a VRMAT format and use them in V-Ray for Revit. We are working on Dynamo support, but for now it is not available. I hope that in the future it will become available. And a few more things that are about to come. As I said, our release is coming very soon, but I I don't want to announce the exact date. First of all, because I'm not allowed to, and everything can happen at the very last moment, but surely it will be very soon. And here's what else to expect: full support for Revit 2019, including the new Revit material types that were introduced there, full redesign of the V-Ray resolution settings. I believe we tried to make them even more easier for you, additional sun and dome white settings, additional camera modes, and more. We are almost at the end of this webinar, so I will do a quick summary of our top 5 reasons why using Vray for Revit would be beneficial for your workflow. As an external render engine for Revit, Vray contributes to a better and smooth user experience. With a simple and intuitive UI, you can start using it straight away. Vray for Revit can be applied to all stages of the design process. You can render concept models as well as highly detailed photorealistic images like the one that we currently see. And despite the simplified UI, the high quality of the renderings is not sacrificed. You also don't need to worry about your hardware, as you can take advantage of all resources that you have, or you can save time rendering in the cloud as well. And since I mentioned time, we saw that V-Ray for Revit offers a palette of streamlined tools that allow you to set up a rendering in a fast and intuitive way without wasting too much time. Many of these tools are entirely new for the Revit environment, like Proxies and Fur and Dome Light, VR scans materials, and so on. They can significantly boost your images, adding a huge dose of realism to them. Using V-Ray for Revit can be a collaborative process, and in most cases it is. You can exchange settings with your colleagues, use a centralized assets library, and share your assets between the 3 AEC host applications, Revit, SketchUp, and Rhino, and 3ds Max as well. At that moment, as a special offer, we have the V-Ray 3.6 trial available for all users who have previously downloaded a trial of V-Ray 3 for Revit. And if you already have a license for V-Ray 3, then you can simply update to V-Ray 3.6 for free. The build is available on the download section of our website. Make sure that you are up to date with what's new by checking out our resource hub regularly for tutorials, help documentation, past webinars, and much more. Simply visit chaosgroup.com/resources. Stay tuned by visiting our official website, which is chaosgroup.com. Our help documentation can be found at docs.chaosgroup.com. To learn more about V-Ray, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Chaos Group TV. You can also join our forum to share tips and tricks with like-minded professionals. We value your feedback and it is welcome anytime. And since this webinar will be recorded, if you found it useful and interesting, don't forget to spread around the V-Ray for Revit knowledge by sharing it with your colleagues and friends.